Deeptika Lohan, who's going to take us through the international press this morning. Deepti, let's start off with a fairly harrowing story, really, about Mosul.
That's right. It's on the front page of The Independent this morning. City of cruelty. And you see this photo of a veiled, faceless woman. Basically, the article's taking a look at what life is like under IS control in Mosul, which is Iraq's second biggest city. It talks in particular about these new methods of torture that they're developing, for instance, the biter, which is basically this mechanical device that takes flesh out, and they're using it on women who they deem don't dress modestly enough. One woman has described it as more painful than labor pains, if that's possible, and another says her sister was simply punished just because she forgot to take her gloves out when she went out in public. For The Independent, it seems like the group is trying to make up in violence and torture for what it has suffered quite crushing setbacks both in Iraq and Syria.
Let's move on to the US press now, and they're talking a lot about Donald Trump, aren't they, and the likelihood of him becoming the Republican nominee.
That's right. The title of this editorial says it all. The Washington Post is imploring, pleading, begging, anything it can do to convince GOP leaders to do everything it can do to stop Donald Trump from becoming the Republican nominee. And they say that what was once laughed off as a joke really is quote, starting to look like the inevitable. And if you read this article, for its semantics are quite interesting. You bullying demagogue, I quote, with no credible agenda, no suitable experience. So very sharp words from the Post this morning about the man who is known for his quotes. He said he'd like to punch a protester, and that he loves the poorly educated. And Trump is no doubt fodder for cartoonists who've taken him to task about that quote, the poorly educated, this morning. And you see there the animal that makes up his famous blonde locks literally eating his brains out, suggesting that he has quite lost his brains himself.
Oh dear. Well, there is, of course, the possibility that Trump may lose the primaries. Talk us through this possibility.
That's right. Now, he's no doubt flamboyant and for some reason extremely popular, but the New York Times says even though he's clinched 3 wins in a row, he could lose the primaries because, as is true of all human nature, he's not infallible. And some of the reasons why, funding, basically the Republican Party's top party donors have shied away from giving Trump money, which so far he hasn't seemed to have needed, but could need in the future. And the party leaders may ensure that it stays that way. There's also still Super Tuesday next week, which could really blow everything out of the water and possibly could see Trump's rivals forming a coalition, even though that seems quite unlikely for the moment. And finally, the big reason is that he's quite simply his own worst enemy, ego, arrogance, and many pundits are betting that he will probably destroy his own campaign.
Well, it hasn't worked so far, but still, you never know. Front runners, they do have everything to lose after all. Let's talk about another election that's coming up tomorrow. We are, of course, talking about the Irish elections.
That's right. The Irish voters are heading to the voting booths tomorrow on Friday, and it'll be taking place under very different circumstances than its previous election, which of course took place just after the IMF bailed out Ireland. Enda Kenny is the Irish Prime Minister. He's really using the economy to draw in voters to his party, and their slogan is "Let's keep the recovery going." And really, he's trying to use the economy to draw voters in. The PM has also apologized ahead of the elections for a series of gaffes that he made during his campaign, mainly around a plan to abolish a tax that he admitted would actually end up making the rich richer. But actually, Stephen, our resident Irish expert, explained to me before that the most interesting part of the Irish election is actually after the vote, because that's when all the parties are scrambling to form some sort of coalition, which has been the case for many decades in Ireland. Now, it's a complicated electoral system that's really turned off a lot of voters. There's Una Mullally, who has written a really funny piece in the Irish Times saying that she's pretty much gotten bored and frustrated with the elections, saying, I quote, "The petty strifes of Irish politics have become insufferable. She's allergic to their voices, to the butchering of language, PR-ready answers, deflection, and evasiveness."
I don't know, maybe Ireland needs its very own Donald Trump to liven things up. We'll have to wait and see how things turn out across in Ireland. Let's move ahead, though, to this weekend's So White Oscars. But there's another ceremony that's been accused of being a bit too white, isn't there?
That's right. It's a Brit Awards. Now, Adele was a big winner of last night's Brit Awards, but it has come under fire for not being diverse enough. And there were just 2 non-white nominations in yesterday's ceremony. That's seen the hashtag BritsSoWhite trending on Twitter just 2 days before the Oscars, which of course has been embroiled in its own controversy. Now, the issue was really raised in a Channel 4 report on Tuesday, and it has been addressed by perhaps one of Britain's most famous black artists, Craig David. Brit organisers have promised to look at developing genres like grime, which actually comes out of the UK and is sort of a mix of garage and dancehall and hip hop. Because 2 of its biggest artists have taken the music charts by storm, but they were surprisingly absent from the nominations last night.
Oh, well, so we'll want to keep an eye on, of course, as the Oscars gear up as well. Thanks very much for that, Deeptika Laurent, with the press review. And